The battering ram hit the front door of 118 Cassidy Court at 4:12 in the morning, and inside, Elijah Voss came awake the way he'd been trained to come awake a decade earlier in a country half a world away. Instantly, completely, every sense already assessing threat before his conscious mind had finished catching up. He was out of bed and moving before the second impact splintered the frame, positioning himself between the bedroom door and his wife, Simone, who was sitting up in bed with the disoriented, terrified confusion of someone torn violently out of sleep by a sound that made no sense in the context of an ordinary Tuesday night. "Stay down," Elijah said, low and controlled, the same voice he'd used to give orders to Marines half his life ago. "Stay down and don't move." The tactical team that flooded through the shattered front door 30 seconds later moved with the practiced, adrenaline-sharpened efficiency of a unit executing a high-risk warrant. Flashlight beams cutting through the dark house, voices overlapping in urgent, clipped commands. The particular chaos of a raid conducted at the exact hour designed to maximize disorientation and minimize resistance. "Police, get on the ground! Hands where we can see them!" Elijah dropped to his knees in the hallway, outside the bedroom door, hands raised, every motion deliberate and visible, the muscle memory of a man who had trained soldiers, in another life, on exactly how to survive the first 90 seconds of an encounter where the difference between compliance and catastrophe came down to speed and clarity. "I'm complying. My wife is in the bedroom. She's unarmed. She's not a threat." "Shut up! Hands behind your back!" He complied. Flashlight swept across his face, across the framed photographs lining the hallway wall. Elijah in dress blues, a service medal catching the light, a photograph from a deployment ceremony, a law degree hanging in a frame near the stairs, details that a commerce search would have registered within seconds, and that this one, moving at the speed panic and adrenaline demanded, blew past entirely. "Where's the product? Where are you keeping it?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Elijah kept his voice level, controlled, even as the cold press of cuffs closed around his wrists and a knee pressed between his shoulder blades. "There's nothing here. You have the wrong house." That's what they all say. The team leader, Sergeant Todd Ferris, a 12-year veteran of the department's tactical unit, running his fourth warrant service of the month on a schedule that had left him operating on considerably less sleep and considerably more institutional certainty than the situation warranted, moved through the house with the swagger of a man who had never once had a warrant service go sideways badly enough to make him question the address on the paper in his hand. "This is 118 Cassidy Court?" "That's correct," Elijah said. "And if you check your warrant carefully, I'd be very surprised if it says 118. Something in the specificity of that sentence, not panic, not desperation, but the calm, precise confidence of a man who sounded considerably more certain of the paperwork than the team currently searching his house, should have registered as worth pausing over. It didn't, not yet, because Ferris's team was already moving through the house with the destructive thoroughness of a search that had committed to finding something before it had confirmed there was anything to find. Drawers emptied onto the floor, closets stripped, a gun safe in the study forced open despite Elijah's repeated calm statement that he'd provide the combination immediately if anyone would simply ask. Simone, cuffed now beside her husband in the hallway, her voice shaking with a mixture of terror and fury she was working hard to keep from tipping into something that might escalate an already volatile scene, finally found the words that would, in the coming hours, matter more than almost anything else said in that house that night. "My husband is a licensed attorney. He is a decorated Marine Corps veteran, and I promise you, when this is over, every single thing you're doing right now is going to matter a great deal more than you currently think it does." Part 2. The address on the warrant. It took 41 minutes for anyone on the tactical team to notice the discrepancy that would end Sergeant Ferris's career. The warrant, when a junior officer finally pulled it out to double-check the address against the house numbers visible from the porch, read 811 Cassidy Court, a house 6 blocks away, on the opposite end of a winding suburban street that looped back on itself in a way that had apparently confused whoever transposed the digits during the warrant's preparation, a transposition nobody on the team had caught before breaching a door at 4:12 in the morning. "Sergeant," the junior officer's voice carried the particular, sinking dread of a man realizing in real time exactly how badly the next several hours of his life were about to unfold. "This says 811. We're at 118. Ferris took the warrant, read it twice, and felt something cold drop through his stomach that had nothing to do with the tactical urgency he'd been operating under for the past 40 minutes. "That's not possible. Dispatch confirmed this address before we rolled." "Dispatch confirmed the address you gave them, Sergeant, which was this one, not the one on the actual warrant." Elijah, still cuffed and kneeling in his own hallway, surrounded by the wreckage of a search that had torn through 11 years of a life he and Simone had built in this house, heard the exchange clearly enough to understand exactly what had just happened, and something in his expression shifted, not into relief, but into the same calm, controlled precision he'd carried through the entire encounter, the precision of a man cataloging every detail of a catastrophic institutional failure in real time, because he understood, with total clarity, that the next several hours were going to determine whether tonight became a quietly buried mistake or something considerably harder to bury. "I'd like these cuffs removed," Elijah said, "and I'd like every officer in this house to stop searching immediately, because you are now conducting an unlawful search of a residence with no valid warrant covering it." Ferris, his own certainty collapsing in real time, gave the order. The cuffs came off. The search stopped, mid-motion. Officers standing amid drawers, dumped onto floors, and closets stripped bare. The sudden stillness of a raid that had, in the space of a single sentence, transformed from a tactical operation into a liability the department would spend months trying to contain. "I need you to understand," Ferris said, his voice carrying none of the authority it had carried 40 minutes earlier, "that this was a clerical error. The warrant was prepared correctly. Somewhere in the transmission to dispatch, the numbers got transposed." "I understand exactly what happened," Elijah said. "What I need you to understand is precisely who you did it to." What Sergeant Ferris did not know, what almost no one on the tactical team fully understood until considerably later that morning, was that Elijah Voss was not simply a decorated veteran and a practicing attorney, details significant enough on their own, but a civil rights attorney specifically. One who had, 3 years earlier, successfully litigated a wrongful raid case against this exact department, a case that had resulted in a substantial settlement and a court-ordered review of the department's warrant verification procedures, a review that, as the events of this exact morning were about to demonstrate with brutal clarity, had apparently never been meaningfully implemented. He had moved to Cassidy Court 2 years after that case concluded, a coincidence of address rather than any deliberate design, though the coincidence would go on to carry a bitter, almost unbearable irony once the full sequence of events became clear. The department had raided the wrong house on the same street where a man who had already successfully sued them for a nearly identical failure happened to live, and had done so as a direct result of the exact procedural gap his own prior litigation had specifically ordered them to close. "I want the officer who transmitted this address to dispatch," Elijah said, once the cuffs were off and Simone, shaking but composed, had wrapped a blanket around her shoulders in a living room that now looked like it had been struck by a controlled demolition. "And I want to know whether this department implemented the verification protocol the court ordered 3 years ago, because if it didn't, what happened here tonight isn't a clerical error. It's a violation of a federal consent decree." Ferris's face, already pale, went several shades paler. Part 3. What the consent decree was for. The internal review that followed moved with a speed the department had conspicuously failed to muster 3 years earlier, propelled entirely by the catastrophic realization that the man whose house they'd just destroyed was uniquely, devastatingly positioned to understand exactly what legal weight the mistake carried. "I want to walk through this carefully," Elijah said 3 days later, seated across from the department's chief and its legal counsel in a conference room considerably calmer than his own living room had been at 4:12 that morning. 3 years ago, I represented a family 2 streets over from mine, whose door your department also broke down on a warrant with an incorrect address. That case resulted in a consent decree requiring double verification of any address against both the warrant document and an independent property record before any tactical warrant service. Can you tell me whether that protocol was actually implemented? The department's legal counsel, a visibly uncomfortable man named Aaron Petrie, who had clearly spent the preceding 3 days discovering exactly how badly this question was going to answer itself, did not have a version of the truth that avoided the obvious conclusion. The protocol was implemented on paper. Dispatch is supposed to cross-reference the warrant address against the county property database before confirming a tactical deployment. Was it followed tonight? No, Petrie admitted. The transposed address was verbally confirmed by the warrant service team without the database cross-check the consent decree requires. So the exact failure my prior case was specifically designed to prevent happened again, 3 years later, to my own house, because a court-ordered safeguard was never actually enforced. There was no answer to that which didn't amount to a confession, and Petrie, to his limited credit, didn't attempt one. I'd like to discuss how the department can make this right. You can start, Elijah said, by understanding that I'm not simply here as a resident whose door you broke down. I'm here as the attorney who already told this department, in writing, 3 years ago, exactly what needed to change to prevent this. I intend to find out, in complete detail, why it didn't. The federal court overseeing the original consent decree took the news of a near-identical violation with considerably less patience than the department's internal review had shown, scheduling an emergency compliance hearing within 2 weeks, an unusually fast turnaround that reflected more than anything else the presiding judge's evident fury at discovering that a court order she had personally signed had gone unenforced for 3 years, only surfacing now because the second victim happened to be the exact attorney who'd litigated the first case. I want to be direct about what troubles this court most, Judge Elaine Cho said during the hearing, reviewing a file that now included both incidents side by side. It is not simply that a tactical team broke down the wrong door at 4 a.m, terrifying 2 people in their own home, though that alone would warrant serious scrutiny. It is that this exact failure was identified, litigated, and ordered corrected 3 years ago, and the correction was never meaningfully enforced. A fact this court would very likely never have learned had the second family harmed by this failure not happened to include the attorney who prosecuted the first case. I am left to wonder how many other addresses this department has gotten wrong in the intervening 3 years, involving residents who did not have Mr. Voss's particular expertise to recognize exactly what had gone wrong and exactly how to hold this department accountable for it. The court ordered an immediate audit of every tactical warrant executed in the 3 years since the original decree, an audit that would, over the following months, surface 2 additional incidents involving transposed or unverified addresses, neither as severe as the raid on Cassidy Court, both quietly resolved at the time without any formal review, both now reopened under the same scrutiny that Elijah's own case had finally forced into existence. Sergeant Ferris was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the broader review. His career effectively ended not by any single act of malice. Investigators found no evidence he had deliberately disregarded the verification protocol, only that he had, like apparently everyone else on his team, operated for years under the assumption that a safeguard existed and was being followed by someone else in the chain. An assumption nobody had ever bothered to verify until it produced a 4 a.m. door breach at the home of a man who understood, better than almost anyone in the department, exactly how to make that assumption's cost impossible to ignore. Elijah and Simone Voss rebuilt the front door of 118 Cassidy Court within a month, the department's insurer covering the repairs with the particular, careful promptness institutions reserve for damage they very much do not want to end up litigated in open court. Elijah gave a single public statement, standing on the porch of the same house that had been breached 6 weeks earlier, his voice carrying the same controlled, deliberate precision it had carried through every stage of the ordeal. I want to be careful about how this story gets told, he said. It would be easy to make this about one transposed digit on one warrant, on one bad night. That's not the actual story. The actual story is that I already told this department 3 years ago in a federal courtroom exactly what needed to change to prevent this. They agreed to the order. They signed the decree. And then, as far as I can tell, they simply stopped thinking about it, the way institutions often do once the immediate pressure of a lawsuit fades. It took my own front door being broken down a second time on the same street for anyone to check whether the fix I'd already won for one family had actually been implemented for every family since. It hadn't. I'd like to know how many doors it would have taken breaking down before anyone checked, if mine hadn't happened to be one of them. The department's revised compliance plan, submitted to the court 2 months later, included not merely a restatement of the original verification protocol, but a new independent auditing mechanism specifically designed to survive the fading institutional attention that had allowed the first order to quietly lapse. A mechanism that Judge Cho, in her order approving the plan, noted existed specifically because this court has learned, at considerable cost to 2 families, that an order without ongoing verification is simply a promise, and promises made under legal pressure have a well-documented tendency to erode once the pressure lifts. Elijah kept the transposed warrant 811 instead of 118. A single reversed pair of digits that had, in the space of one violent, disorienting night, nearly cost him and his wife considerably more than a broken door. Folded in a drawer in his home office, not as a trophy, but as a working reminder of exactly how thin the line was between a court order winning real, lasting change and a court order simply becoming a piece of paper that everyone eventually stopped reading closely enough to follow. The end.